Good morning, gardening friends. It's a beautifully sunny day. It's February 5th, and I thought I'd start in the front yard. I just sort of was walking around yesterday and saw some exciting developments. Here is my tree fern that I covered with an old bath towel, and you can see some new fronds unfurling, which means it survived. This is my first winter for that particular Australian tree fern. And of course, this is in a protected spot in front of my house on the southern exposure, but I was tickled to see this one and this one. That green down there actually survived the 20-degree weather that we had. It was covered over with a towel, as well as this small frond over there. I'll have to clean it up later today. I can't touch it because it makes me itch. So I'll have to get some gloves and clean it up a little. So I may have found a good spot for Australian tree ferns. I used Monty Don's advice from Gardener's World, which is basically all the growth tip is the only thing you need to protect. So when that gets taller, it should get, well, ultimately it'll get 7 or 8 feet tall. I won't live to see that, but all you need to do is protect the growing tip. And of course you need to keep that tip moist at all times in the summer. The roots to that are basically used just for anchoring and not so much for getting moisture out of the soil, although I imagine they still work that way. Here you can see the Johnny Jump Ups really like this western exposure, and it looks like this palm is going to make it. Surprisingly, I don't hold out much hope for this particular frond because it got nipped by frost, but the ones that follow should do fine. Again, I just salvaged that. That was on a spot where I planted something else in the front yard, and it was a beautiful 3 or 4 foot tall, what was that? That's a Mediterranean fan palm. And I moved it to one spot and it didn't do well, and moved it here and put it in a pot, and it may live there, so we'll see. You can see some new growth in this African iris. I need to go ahead and cut the old growth back before too much new comes out, because if you get it early, you can get it with hedge trimmers. If not, you've got to mess with hand pruners. The other thing I hadn't talked about in a while is last year, if you go back through the videos, I bought 3 Lenten roses, and this one seems to have done the best. I got them. Oh, I hear Miss Mimi. Good morning, Miss Mimi. Yeah, I'll be right with you. Yeah. There are 3 Lenten roses. This one did the best. And actually, to be truthful, I've stomped on it a couple of times. That's why I have the stick there. My electrical outlet is there on the wall. So if you want to plug anything in from here, you have to work your way through the aspidistras. Here's a second of the Lenten roses. They're not going to bloom this year, but at least they lived. I never tried growing them before. And I had read in Horticulture magazine last year, and there's the third one that I have. So I'm just tickled that they are sending up multiple leaves. Maybe next year they'll send up blooms. This is the time of the year that they normally send up a bloom. And the blooms are similar, like I say, if you go back to like last February when I started out the videos, I have pictures of these Lenten roses in bloom. They're similar in nature, not shape, but in nature to a poinsettia, because what looks like the flower petals are actually colored leaves, and the flowers are little dinky things way at the center. Yeah, Mimi, I'm ignoring you, but it's sunny. You'll live. Come on, let's take a walk. I was watching the bees work over these camellias before. The good thing about these camellias, that I don't know the name of this again, but the bees can get at the, there's one working now. It can get out all the good parts in the center. There are not a lot of bees around this time of the year, but there are a few. There you can see the blooms on the azalea. That's my autumn carnation. That was the spot where I had planted butterfly bushes, and the butterfly bushes died. So I figured I'd put the azaleas and stop fighting Mother Nature. And this is a shady back garden, so plant things that thrive in the shade. Lots of new growth on my hydrangeas. Those are Nico Blue hydrangeas. Miss Mimi is tickled to be outside. I let her out once this morning and she ran back in because Oscar was back here getting some food. This is probably the last time you'll see nice looking hyacinths here. They've about bloomed out. What I typically do with them to save the bulbs is after the flowers fade, I don't let them go to seed. I cut the flowers out, leaving the green foliage behind. Pansies are doing really well in that bed. This is my new bay tree. I'm going to cut this big stalk down and I'm going to try and make it into a standard. But I figured it was enough shock just to plant it, so to plant it up in that pot. So, and I don't plan on throwing any of those bay leaves out. Have you looked at the price of bay leaves recently? You just need to dry them first, so I'll pluck the leaves off and let them dry. Speaking of prices of things, have you seen the price of toilet paper lately? I could not believe the prices. I'm going to start stocking up on dollar bills. It's going to be cheaper to use dollar bills pretty soon. But I digress. There are my, I always want to call them trout lilies, but they're not. They're toad lilies. I'm going to try and divide off a section of that. They do really well in the shade, but the problem is the ginger lilies I have in front of them overshadow them in the high summers, and so they're kind of stuck to that little spot between the camellia above and the gingers below. I may go ahead. Those are cardamom gingers. You can't buy those. I got them as a pass-along plant from a friend when I was working yet. It is where the spice cardamom comes from, and if you break off a leaf, it smells just like cardamom. Hence the name cardamom gingers. Again, another Nico Blue. And the other azalea, autumn carnation. I did finally recover from my second shingles shot. It's hard to say that, shingles shot. It took about 3 or 4 days for me to get over it, but it helps having sun today to get me out in the yard. I'm going to be doing a little bit of work out here today, even though it's a Sunday. I do a little light pruning here and there. Not really anything new going on back here, but I'm still kind of surprised to see the forsythia is still blooming. It's not as spectacular. I've talked to people about that grow this here. This is my first attempt. I planted these about 3 years ago because I had them in my gardens up north. And up north, they're spectacular. I've got some pictures of it. I just haven't figured out how I can put them online so that you can see the pictures. But the entire bush gets covered in yellow flowers, and here it's kind of sporadic, but and on the plus side, they're still in full bloom, and it's been doing that now for like 2 weeks. There is another one behind this cycad. I need to trim that cycad back this week, but you can see it's there. Need to clean up around here too. The flax lilies got frostbit, but they're starting to come back again. My lavender is still doing fine. It's in a pot. I've tried many ways to grow lavender, but the only way it seems to do well for me is in a pot. And you can see this is it used to be a sunny spot, but now it only gets afternoon, evening sun since this loquat took over. This loquat. The good thing about that is it does screen it gives me privacy from the street. And it is amazing how much noise deadening power tall trees have. When I first bought this house 30 years ago, I had a bunch of trees by the road in the front. And the first thing I did was, I want curb appeal. Cut the trees down or cut a lot of them out and left only a few. And then I was kind of shocked that suddenly there are noises there that I never noticed before. So trees do a pretty good job of deadening noises. There you can see the lady palm. That's the one that I cut off a shoot and planted it over there. It's one of the palms. It's not very frost tolerant. However, I just threw a blanket over that, and it is under the loquat tree. But to finish that thought, the lady palms really do like deep shade. It's one of the few palms that'll do in deep shade. Where that lady palm is now was where I had that Mediterranean fan palm in the pot. When I planted it back here, I had moved it from the front yard. It was about as tall as this plant here, not Nandina fatsia, but it did not like the shade, and it died, so started dying a miserable death. So I put a palm in the shade that likes shade instead. It's better when you don't fight nature. I'm learning that out, or finding that out. Here, I will cut off some of these dead leaves at the top on this lady palm, but the young growth is still there, so that's all fine. Got my fountains going today. It's just a nice day to be out and about, so I'm going to get a couple of gardening magazines that I haven't read yet. When I'm busy, when they come, I just throw them aside in a pile. And it's days like today when I've got some time to myself that I like to get out in the garden and just enjoy. One thing I did do when I wasn't feeling all that well earlier in the week is I, of course, watched a lot of YouTube gardening programs. And it finally hit me. I mean, it's a duh moment. But I guess there are many types of gardens that give us pleasure. You can garden for food, and you get, of course, the fruits of all your labors you get to eat, fresh veggies. There are gardens for pleasure that are made to look at, and gardens for contemplation, where you just go to think. And those last two, I got to thinking, all those beautiful gardens in Europe, in Italy, in England, the people that built them didn't actually garden in them. They paid someone else to garden. So there are actually a couple of different layers of enjoyment. One is the enjoyment of actually doing the gardening, getting your hands in the dirt. And then there's the other form of enjoyment, which is just sitting out in your garden, enjoying it, listening to the birds. So my thought for today is, get out there and enjoy your garden. Don't worry about what needs to be done. It'll all happen another day. Have a good one.